So data from Friday. Last two graphs we need to talk about today are the frequency polygon and the OGIV graph. I'm going to start by just kind of giving you a brief little description of these. If you want to write down some of the bullet point information, you can. And then on our paper, at the bottom where we didn't get to on Friday, we'll make our own with our data to have an example. Okay, so a frequency polygon is a line graph that sometimes you'll see it kind of superimposed on top of a histogram like this, but the line graph itself is the polygon that we're looking at. And it shows a continuous change in the frequencies of our classes. It uses class midpoints. So we did a histogram on Friday that used class midpoints, and you can see when we have it superimposed here, our values are right in the middle where that class midpoint would be labeled. Okay, so when we have them, here they labeled with boundaries at the bottom, but we'll actually label with class midpoints at the bottom. It's a polygon, which means a closed figure, if you guys remember that from geometry. So let's say our first class has a frequency of 5. We don't want to start there because it doesn't create a closed figure. So what we're going to do is list out all of our midpoints, and then we're going to extend by one midpoint in either direction. One midpoint distance, or one class width, I guess, to the left, and a class width to the right. And that ensures that our values start at 0 on either side, and it closes the figure against the x-axis. Okay. So we're going to use class midpoints. We're going to create a line graph, and it begins and ends on our x-axis. We're going to extend by one width in either direction to make sure that happens. So we're extending to the left before our data has started, so we can ensure that's a 0 frequency. And then we're extending to the right after our data is ended. So again, we can ensure that's a 0 frequency. Okay, and then the last graph that we didn't talk about is an OGIV graph. I have no idea where the name came from. It is a cumulative frequency graph. So if you remember on the table that we did on Friday, the very last column was cumulative frequency. It's the frequency of that class plus all the ones before it, and eventually the last value in our cumulative frequency is our total data values n. So your graph's always going to look something like this. Again, it's going to start on the x-axis, and then it's just going to continue increasing. The parts where it's steeper show a faster increase, a greater jump in the frequencies, and then ultimately where it ends at the top, that value should always be your n. Again, where n is the number of data values in your set. You can label this with class boundaries or with categories. If you have categories, there's occasions where we're going to see those. Again, it needs to start at 0. So if my first frequency is not 0, we extend backwards by one class width. Okay. All right, cool. So onto your paper. First thing we're going to do is create a frequency polygon, and we're going to use class midpoints to do that. Okay. It is still representing frequency on the side. Horizontal axis is whatever we're graphing. In this case, it was words per minute. So label, label, label. And we're going to use our class midpoint. So the first class midpoint I had, I'm going to flip back here for a sec, was 39.5, and then they increased by 4. Okay, so 39.5, increasing by 4, we had 6 of them, so 43.5. 47.5, 51.5, 55.5, 59.5. So that's 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Then we're going to add an extra class width on either side. So on the left, I'm going to subtract 4. 35.5, and I'm going to make a point. That's where my frequency polygon is going to start. Don't forget your little break there because it's not beginning at 0. And then on the right, 59.5, I'm going to add 4 to that. 63.5, that's where my polygon's going to end at. Okay. What's the highest frequency we had in our table on Friday? 4, 5, 5. Okay. So let's count up to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and wherever the class midpoint for that class is, we're going to make a dot, and then we're going to connect the dots to create our polygon, our closed figure. All right, so our frequencies were as follows: 1, 4, 5, 3, 3, 1. All right, 1, 4, 5, 3, 3, 1, and then back to 0. And you have a frequency polygon. Any questions there? No? Okay. Last graph then, the OGIV graph. It's also going to look like a line graph. This time we're going to use class boundaries. And OGIV is that cumulative frequency. So I'm actually going to start on my vertical axis here. I'm going to write cumulative frequency. Cumulative if will work fine. And then the largest value we had, our n value from our data set, was 17. So we're going to need to go all the way up to 17 for this one. On Friday. Okay. All right, so I need to go all the way up to 17. I'll count by 5s here. 5, 10, 15, 20. That'll work. Okay, again, words per minute on the bottom. And we are labeling with class boundaries this time. So I'm going to flip back to my table. So my first class boundary was 37.5. So let's start with that guy. And then we're going to again increase by 4s. Give myself a little break there. 37.5. And then every 4 units after that. 41.5, 45.5, 49.5, 53.5, 57.5, 61.5, and I think that was maybe my last one. Okay. 37.5 is half a unit lower than my lowest data value, so it is beginning at 0. So I don't have to extend an extra boundary to the left here. Your cumulative frequency graphs, again, just like the frequency polygon there, should always start on the horizontal axis. Then at the next boundary, that represents the first class is complete. We can include that frequency. So my first class had a frequency of 1, so at 41.5, frequency of 1. Okay, then you can start looking in that last column that we've created to see what where your other points are going to be. Just every successive boundary mark we've made, you're going to keep increasing until you get all the way to 17. So our next one, we increased by 4, which takes us up to 5. Then we increased by 5, which took us up to 10. Then we increased by 3. 3 again, so up to 16, and then finally 17 at the end. We connect the dots. And then again, that last value should be where n is at, which in our problem was 17. Okay, so that's an OGIV and a frequency polygon, the last two that you need to worry about for this section. Any questions on either of those? Cool. All right, so your last objective of the day, and then you can work on homework the rest of the period. I have an exit ticket. You're going to work on this with your partner, so I'm just going to give you one per partner group. There's 3 graphs on here. You're not making the graphs. You're just answering questions from what data you are gathering from the graph, what information you're gathering from the graph. When you are done with your exit ticket, just put it in the second from the top tray in front of my desk there is your class period, and then you guys can work on your Math Excel the rest of the period. Math Excel is due tomorrow night by midnight. Does that sound right? Tomorrow or Wednesday. Double check our calendar. Okay. I'm gonna have you guys work in a group. They're all making it together. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think it's just a frequency because everyone has the relative one.
Yeah, this one.
Okay. Don't you just subtract like this from this?
Oh, no, I was talking about the.
Oh, yeah, I might have like 16, 39. Oh, yeah. 36, 32, 48, yeah.
Because the point is, I know it's. Well, yeah. These don't have. Because I was thinking like this.
Four. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, yep. Got it, yep. Nice.
How many, I would still say this one should be the same. Oh, it's not. I think it would still be the same, just using different.
You should